whilst Mozilla is implementing things that nobody asked for, I don't know who is demanding these features, like the AI window, discussions of agentic browsing, lots of random little AI things that I'm sure people are really excited about, and we've discussed a lot of this stuff in this AI direction they've been going for quite a while now. I've talked about this in previous videos, and I'm not going to dive into a lot of that stuff here. Instead, whilst all of that stuff is going on, whilst people are just really confused about what Mozilla is trying to do, this is one of those rare times where at least there is a very minor W. It's a minor one, but it's still something that people have been asking for a very long time. The stupid .mozilla folder. Not the folder itself. No one likes the folder. No one likes to deal with the folder, not just with Firefox, but with anything else in Mozilla's stack, with forks of Firefox, because all of them have the exact same problem. Firefox dumps all of its files, the cache, your extensions, all of this garbage into one folder in your home directory called .mozilla. And Firefox is not the only thing that does this. A lot of other projects completely unrelated to Mozilla do the same. This is the traditional way of handling files for an application. But we don't live in the 80s anymore. There is a better system to use that a lot of other projects use, because you'll notice that a lot of projects have their config files in the config directory, and their cache files in the cache directory, and their data files, their plugins, things like that, in the data directory, which is .local/share, but the data directory, and all of these things are controlled, if implemented correctly, by a variable, or by separate variables for each of the different folders. This is the free desktop XDG base directory specification. This specifies where different kinds of files for an application should be located on your system. And whilst it's a little bit less convenient, there's a good reason why it exists. If you want to go and back up your configs for an application, you don't want to back up the cache. It's very unlikely you want to back up the cache, so that's in a separate place, and you can just back up everything in the config directory, and now that's backed up. Or back up everything in the data directory in .local/share, and now that's backed up. And Firefox, for its entire life, has ignored this spec. But ignored no longer. So this is the issue in question. This is the report 259356, support for the freedesktop.org XDG base directory specification, opened 21 years ago, closed 4 days ago. Not closed as, we're not going to fix it. Not closed as, we'll deal with it later. Closed as dealt with. Now, obviously, there are a bunch of other duplicates, because when something exists for 21 years, you know, people are going to make their own reports, either thinking that this one's been forgotten about, or not even realizing it exists. Let's see how this got resolved, and how it took 21 years. Now, in the write-up for the issue, there is this very amusing thing. This might not require many lines in the code, but will require moving some config and data files from .phoenix to probably xdg config home/phoenix and xdg cache home/phoenix, and then data home for the data stuff, depending on the needs. This is so old that it's back when they used the Phoenix branding. That is how old of a report we are dealing with right now. Also, when they say might not require many lines of code, well, it turns out over the years that when you rely on a specific directory name, you may hard code that directory name in ways it probably shouldn't be hard coded. And what made this a little bit more complicated is, especially back when this was first reported, Mozilla had a lot more random side projects like SeaMonkey and things like that built directly off of Firefox, and all of them had the exact same problem. So here is the report in Thunderbird, opened 13 years ago. This one has had quite a bit less activity, so I don't know if that one's going to be resolved in its own way or what's going to happen there, but Firefox is the main one people point to. And you know what always really amuses me about these really old issue trackers, these really old bug reports? Even with the really early comments, so this is 21 years ago, 21 years ago, 21 years ago, and then there's a whole year gap until the next thing. Oftentimes with these really early issues, there weren't that many people looking at the project. Obviously, Firefox is a big project, and it was even big back in those days, but there was just a lot less attention that these projects were getting overall. So a lot of these issues just completely got swept under the rug. Here we go. 7 comments in, it's already been 4 years. So unsurprisingly, a lot of this early discourse didn't really go anywhere because when there's a year between comments, it's kind of hard to have any sort of discussion. When we get to comment 16 here, there is at least some discourse on where files should be going, what the things actually should be called. So in this case, there was a suggestion to do config home / Firefox, because they had changed to Firefox from Phoenix at this point, / profile, so you can have different configs for each of your individual profiles, and then / config files, or data home, you have your data files, cache, you have your browser cache, things like that. This is a totally reasonable way to handle it. The issue is there is some discussion that happens later on, and we'll get to this, where it's not entirely clear the distinction between some of these categories. By the time we get to comment 27, we are already 8 years in. It is 2012 now. While this issue is set to platform or Linux, this issue applies to all Unix-like OSs except macOS, which by 2012 is... Linux by that point is kind of the main one. Yes, there is still some corporate Unix that is still hanging on by this point, but that kind of died out early 2000s, late 90s, except for like enterprise workstation, systems that you're probably not running Firefox on anyway. I've also seen no mention of the XDG runtime directory, just in case this is where user-specific runtime files should be stored, i.e. sockets. When most people talk about the XDG directory spec, they mostly talk about config, data, and cache, because for most users, these are the ones you're really concerned with, but there are other locations that are important as well. It's usually just for stuff the user isn't generally concerned with. If you want to check out the full spec, I might leave it linked down below. And with basically no progress being made, someone makes mention of the Thunderbird issue that had been made. Again, this is 28 comments in, it has been 8 years by this point, and then we start having the waste of time. Hey, bump. Ping. Bump. Always very useful. I'm kind of happy that this is a trend that has died down. This was something that used to be very, very common. People would just send a completely useless message, usually ping, usually bump, something along those lines, just to ask if anybody is looking at this. And if anybody was looking at this, then they would have been posting that they were looking at it. It was one of these things where I'm sure somebody somewhere did start looking at something because it got a bump, but most of the time, it is just sending out an email to everybody on the list. A far more useful reminder is an explanation on what the specification is, where files should be located, more details, here's some links you can check out, and then also places that are making use of the specification as a way to say, hey, everyone else is already doing this. Maybe it's time to give this a look. This isn't something where, 1 or 2 projects here and there have implemented this. By this point, GNOME, KDE, GTK, Qt, XFCE, no link to LXD, but they were using it, VLC, and a bunch of other projects that are really important projects were already doing this. But most relevant to what we're doing here, Chrome, a direct competitor browser, implemented the spec, which basically means that unless you're doing something wildly different from Chrome, there is no reason that a browser couldn't also implement it. One thing I will say with KDE, though, is whilst they do technically make use of the spec, if you ever go into your config directory you're going to notice there is a lot of these files with K in their name, like critter.rc and crunner.rc. The reason why it's like that is KDE doesn't have a global folder for KDE-related files. Instead, they just stick a K at the front and then basically spam the directory. Again, they're not the only ones that do so, but they are the most egregious with it. One of the reasons why Firefox Mozilla is the way it is actually because of Windows. So on the Windows side, they dump everything into app data, Mozilla, Firefox, profiles, and then on the Linux side, obviously it's a different path because we don't have an app data and the rest of this path wouldn't really make much sense on the Linux side, but it's taking everything that would have been in this folder at the end and then just putting it into .mozilla. So instead of having a completely different structure on the Linux side, it all just does it in the exact same way. This apparently for some people, they might like dual boot and then share the profile. I don't know why you would do it this way instead of doing it through Firefox Sync. Was Firefox Sync a thing at this point? Maybe Sync wasn't a thing, in which case that would make sense. And following this, we actually started seeing some active discourse trying to resolve the problem. It was still a long way from actually... Okay, Sync is a thing at this point. It was a long way from actually being resolved, but people were at least thinking about the problem. People were discussing, hey, what can I actually do to get this working? Can I review these changes? Can I actually make some progress here? And there really was something being done. People were working on patches. It's just those patches were not complete enough to the point where they were ready to actually be added into Firefox main. And when you fixed one problem, people realized there are a bunch of other problems that all happen to be attached together. There were all of these blocking bugs, and it wasn't as simple as just changing where a couple of files are being generated. There was a lot of stuff that was being assumed to belong in this directory, because at this point, it had been basically hard-coded like that for, 9 years since it had been reported, but well over a decade. And here's where we ran into the first kind of problem. I have, as module owner, decided that we do not plan to separate config and data. The distinction is blurred to begin with. Bookmarks are sure to be one man's data and another man's config, as are things like root certs, certificate overrides, and other things, because no other platform makes the distinction. Coders working on the project are unlikely to know or care about the difference, leading to subtle XDG-only bugs. As I said earlier, that would be a reasonable complaint if Chrome hadn't already done so. And you can just look at what Chrome is doing and then yoink their system. Just do that. Also, this is a very solvable problem with documentation. Explain where certain files should be going, and then people know where certain files should be going. This is not a question of right and wrong. It is a question of engineering a cross-platform application. Because the distinction between data and config is not a concept of any of our other platforms, it is something that engineers working on Firefox will think about. That means they will use the wrong directory, and there will be subtle Linux-only bugs, and the distinction is definitely still blurry. Because of this engineering reality, I have made the decision that we will not support this distinction and will store everything in one place. Given the current distinction, I believe that place will be data. And as I was talking about Chrome earlier, this person here explains how Chrome has done it and how this is a very solvable problem. This is not something you just have to reinvent from nothing. And then we got to this one. We are not going to separate config and data. That discussion is closed, and further discussion of it is unwelcome in this bug. Obviously, it has to be welcome because the bug cannot be resolved without it. So either this bug is closed and we're not going to fix this, or you have to discuss the separation of config and data because you can't have it both ways. Following this, discussion kept going on for a few more comments, and then eventually we got to this right here. I am restricting comments on this bug. Bugzilla isn't intended as a debate forum. Benjamin's the module owner in this area, and he's already asked Landium to look into it. Both are long-time Mozilla contributors, is beyond reproach. No further flames, please. Comments are restricted to users with edit bug privilege. With privilege comes responsibility, so please consider carefully before commenting if you are able. So basically, there were people in here that were kind of getting a little bit too heated. Some people were saying that this person just hates Linux and wants Linux to fail, and things that are just not really relevant to the main point being discussed here. It's one thing to have a discussion about the separation of config and data, but when you're just complaining and just basically starting a fight, that doesn't really help. And obviously, as nothing was really going to progress from this point, when they were basically saying, yeah, we're not going to lock it, but we are going to limit who can comment, it basically just died for a couple of years, and then 2 years later, it was unrestricted, basically putting a stop to every bit of discussion that was happening. So is there any progress with this? Well, no. Nobody's assigned to it, and it's not a priority of the team. And for the next 5 or so years, basically nothing really happened. We had some fun advocacy comments, people being like, hey, can you fix this? Hey, it's been 15 years, can you fix this? And obviously, nobody was fixing this. But somebody did get assigned to it, which is better than nothing. Now, they were assigned to it, but they didn't actually do anything, so no progress was made just yet. And from there, it's really a lot of the same for the next couple of years. There are some comments here and there, people are discussing about the problem, there's some, arguments about where data should be stored, other things that are implementing this, all of this stuff, but no actual real implementation is really being done. Other people were assigned to the bug, other blockers were being listed, there was discussion that was being had, there was obviously lots of the off-topic, lots of the Me Too discussions, and just, again, nothing very useful. But somewhere along the line, things kinda just changed. When this person started working on stuff, there was quite a number of updates, not necessarily big changes, just listing what things depend on, duplicates, someone actually triaging the issue. What's the blocker on this? Time. I'm focused on other things, but they were at least paying attention to the thread and were willing to work on it. And from then on, for a couple of months, it wasn't even mainly comments. It was the Fabricator automation updating the ticket with things that are being worked on, dependencies that are resolved, other things that are being done, and progress was actually being made. And then 2 months ago, the biggest blocker was fixed. I'll make sure at least tests are good enough and proceed with some communication and tentative landing after the code freeze ends. Basically, out of nowhere, after almost 21 years, this person just said, you know what? I'm just gonna fix it. I'm gonna fix all of the blockers. I'm gonna fix everything this depends on and just get this done. And from there, a lot of testing was being done. A lot of these final issues were being ironed out. For some reason, the test was being run on Windows. Don't know why. Also, it was being run on Mac. Yeah, it's not as surprising it failed. It's a Linux-only change. Obviously, the test would fail because it's not going to put the files there because it doesn't do that on those platforms. And then, just a few days ago, a completely unceremonious announcement, a bunch of links. But the important part is this was marked as resolved. This was marked as fixed. This was actually dealt with and was added into the Firefox 147 release notes. But it is not a perfect solution. So there is no migration path. Only new profiles are expected to use the new setup. Migrating manually is at your own risk. Make a backup beforehand. So either you can go and delete the original folder, obviously back up the files, and then move the files into the new location, which is kinda janky and you probably shouldn't do that, the better solution is just do it with Firefox Sync. Firefox Sync is vastly, vastly easier. Also, there are some edge case issues which can cause problems. There are 2 known bugs where things hard code the file path, which might cause issues during a migration, e.g. some extension metadata and some PKCS11 config. Not sure what the impact of breaking those would be. The PKCS11 bug has a link to a script that rewrites the path, so at least that one is fixable. These are some minor issues, and I'm sure if they do cause some major issue, they cause a crash, things like that, they will be resolved. But now, if you delete the folder, obviously make sure you have Firefox Sync enabled, and then sync it again, it'll be in the new location. I'm not sure how long this is going to take to propagate out to the Firefox forks, but assuming they are following it relatively closely, sometime down the line, that is going to happen. And I don't know for other Firefox-based products like Thunderbird, what's gonna happen there. If they have their own issues that are blocking it, if they're interested in fixing it, what's gonna happen. But at least for now, mainline Firefox on version 147 has finally fixed this after 21 years. But what do you think? Is this one of those things where you ever actually cared about it? Or is it just the fact that you have so many of these folders, so many of these files just littering your home directory that one of them changing it doesn't even matter anymore? I'd love to know. So let me know your thoughts down below. If you liked the video, go like the video. If you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, check out the Patreon, subscribes, daily bearer pay, linked in the description down below. That's gonna be it for me, and you know what? You gotta celebrate the minor wins. Something like this.